Okay, hit it, Steve. It's 1882, on land bought 80 years prior in the Louisiana Purchase, and you're looking at the Herald office. It's the publication that starts our story of the Mountain Beat, when newspapers were as old as the frontier towns they reported on, keeping track of new laws and land stakes. This frontier town is now Billings, Montana. According to former Bozeman Chronicle editor and UM professor Dennis Swybold, no community of serious ambition boasted fewer than 2 newspapers. The ambitious town of Havre was no different. The established plain dealer and the scrawny Havre Post feuded for influence in the early 1900s. The Post's publisher, having misspelled justice of the peace as P-I-E-C-E, was assailed by the plain dealer, which wrote that the typo was enough to make old Noah Webster's shade jump upon the nether-bound thunderbolts of destruction. N.C. Westcott of the Post retorted back, calling the plain dealer's editor an egotistic shyster, drunk and half crazy. Feuding presses started by entrepreneurial benefactors of westward expansion tell the story of American enterprise. Soon, papers were consolidated. The Herald, from slide 1, merged with the Rustler and the Post of Billings to become the Billings Gazette, which was bought by the Anaconda Copper Mining Company as one of 9 daily papers under its control in the 1920s. Then, the Gazette was bought by Lee Enterprises, its current owner. These mergers were the story of Western journalism in the 1900s as companies like Scripps Howard bought up papers and fed them stories from their own United Press. Newspapers were often partisan, whether squeezed by an anaconda or watched from a lighthouse. The West's media ecosystem lifted up new voices as well, including war reporter and Berkeley graduate Marguerite Higgins. Her work was important to the West's understanding of World War II when she reported on the liberation of Dachau and Buchenwald. Later reporting on the Korean War, she was the first woman to receive a Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. One of America's most trusted journalists grew up as a farm boy on the Mountain Beat in Washington. He debated for his high school, later changing his name from Egbert to Edward R. Murrow. During college, Murrow worked in timber. In fact, if not for an education job in New York, which led to a CBS lecture series, he may have worked in China for a timber company. But compared to Higgins, Murrow's war reporting was better known. In World War II, the radio pioneer broadcast from the BBC. The Nazis bombed his office 3 times, but Murrow continued. Broadcasts from London showed the resolve of the English during air raids and led to more American support for Britain during the war. The Mountain Beat became globalized through the aspirational journalism that Higgins and Murrow practiced. In a time when Missoula had newspapers that competed for attention through bold red lettering, this was how the Missoula Sentinel covered the end of World War II. At 5 cents, the Missoula Sentinel was a behemoth compared to today's papers. Perhaps the greatest writers in the Mountain Beat, though, were advertisers who exploited history for gain. For example, inviting a country at war to shop at Safeway for day-after plans. My favorite ad, though, was for used cars in 1963. We can't be sure where the rest of these came from, but they are ready to travel now. Just as newspapers, companies swayed readers, so did its advertisers. A revered piece of writing from the Mountain Beat was Montana's state 1972 Constitution. Recent polling shows 65% of Montanans support keeping it as is. However, the document, which added a right to a clean and healthful environment, an independent redistricting commission, and a right to privacy, only narrowly passed, with rural areas opposing ag provisions. Possibly prophesized by the state constitution, climate became an increasingly important topic in the West. In Butte, the Berkeley pit began to fill with contaminated water, now with a pH somewhere between tomato juice and coffee. Coverage has evolved from the decline of the mining industry to current reporting about the pit's potential for mineral extraction. Elsewhere, logging bans materialized, taking the spotted owl as its mascot. Because of the West's roots in stewardship, the region can be seen as the birthplace of environmental reporting. Newspapers from the 1990s showed the divide between residents of the Pacific Northwest concerned about conservation and those employed in timber, just like Ed Murrow decades earlier. At the same time as timber's decline, the Mountain Beat was in its own depression. As the internet rose, 3,200 newspapers closed nationwide, leading to a creeping news desert, especially in rural areas of the West. Journalists adapted to cable news and now social media, but it's clear 30,000 newsroom jobs have been lost. The weekend, journalists documented tragedy in the West, including through this Pulitzer-winning photo from Rocky Mountain News after Columbine. What reporting exposed then was a system unequipped for change. Through writing, journalism shows how to remedy what goes wrong. This is the power of words and images after bullets. Journalism informs Western communities, telling citizens where the smoke is coming from and when the flames get too close. Then it helps us rebuild through keeping government accountable for preparedness and relief. In communities, especially in Montana, without reliable internet access, our radios alert us of natural disasters. Built on the West's values of independence, a strong student media landscape continues to thrive, including in Montana State's Exponent and the University of Montana's Kaiman. As an industry shrinks, its future may not be in a new technology, but rather the education system that creates curious minds to cover the mountain beat. A template for adaptation might also lie in the past. Native Americans created durable accounts of history through oral storytelling and hide art like this. Just like media is being forced to change, Native media was too when efforts to Americanize tribes took place. Tribes documented these changes. Today, the Flathead and Fort Peck reservations have their own newspaper. Mediums changed, but the people of the West have always shared their stories. Who gets that right? This year, tribal radio stations in the West experienced massive funding cuts from the Fed amid a shift to a more nationalized media. Journalism should be truly representative in politics, but also in the communities and stories the West covers. The mountain beat seems to be shrinking now. A population is blindly navigating its own backyard. It can seem like a glacially slow decline, but because of artificial intelligence, corporate agendas, and public disinterest in funded media, statistically 2 newspapers will shut down just this week. Will one of yours be next? Well, that's for you to decide.